Hey guys, Boz here. So this is part 4 of the traumatic brain injury series. This is my 4th traumatic brain injury. You've heard about 1 through 3 so far. So let's get into this one. So I had a migraine on this particular day, and I'd been laying out on the couch in my parents' house. Now, like I said, they have a ranch. So there was no stairs to go up or anything when I needed to go to bed. I was feeling pretty out of it, and my head was just throbbing. I couldn't think properly. There was a lot of things I just wasn't able to deal with right then. So I decided the best bet for me was to just make my way into my bedroom, lay down, and try to sleep off the migraine. So I got up and I started walking into my bedroom. It was probably about a couple hundred feet, you know, not too far. I got most of the way. I had left the carpet area. At this point, it had been a while since any of my other head injuries, so I had gotten to the point where I had stopped using the walker. I had stopped using the cane, at least around the house. When I went out in public, I still needed it for longer distances, but around the house, just going back and forth, I was okay, I thought. So I was walking in to go to bed, and at some point before I got to my room, I passed out while standing up. The pain from my headache mixed with everything else that was going on was just too much for me, and my body just went. I passed out, and I was standing upright, and I fell face first right into the floor. I slammed my face into the floor, my head into the floor. I broke off a piece of one of my teeth. It caused a couple of teeth to get broken within my mouth. I hit so hard. Again, I was knocked out. Again, went to the hospital. Again, had imaging. And again, nothing was found. I was told that things were pretty much okay, that I could go home. So by this point, I actually had a neurologist. So that was good. I was actually at that point on my second neurologist. The first one was not a good fit for me. You will find, if you have traumatic brain injury, chances are you'll probably go through a few neurologists before you find one that is a good fit for you, one that has your best interests at heart, one that understands traumatic brain injury in a way that they can help you, as opposed to just giving you meds and sending you on your way. They can actually give you strategies to move forward. The right neurologist should be able to hook you up with some of these programs that I talked about. The Carson Center for TBI, which runs under the umbrella of the SHIP, the Statewide Head Injury Program, which also runs under the umbrella of the MRC, the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Committee. And I did want to make a quick amend while I'm here and I think of it. On my other episode, when I was talking about my pseudobulbar affect disorder, I accidentally said aspect. It's affect. So if you go to look it up at all, it's called pseudobulbar affect disorder. So anyways, back to the story. So we made an appointment for me to see the neurologist. We figured at that point it was best to make sure that everything was okay, to not just assume that this was just another incident. Again, I'd had 3 prior. This was another one where my parents were there when it happened. They saw exactly what happened. They watched me go from standing, pitching over like a tree in the forest. I just went right down. And they saw it. So down I went. Neurologist appointment was made. Talked to them. Told them what was going on. At this point, I was informed that I had had so many head injuries in such a short period of time that I would be permanently brain damaged. I was told that I would be permanently handicapped, that for the rest of my life I would have problems. I was never going to fully recover. That was a hard one for me. To be told I was going to be brain damaged for the rest of my life, that one really struck home. I've always prided myself on my intelligence. I've prided myself on my ability to think, my ability to reason, my ability to read, and those were slipping away. It was getting harder and harder to do those kinds of things because my brain was not working correctly. I couldn't read anymore, as I said before. I was not going anywhere. I had turned into a hermit. At this point, I was leaving the house some, but I was only leaving the house enough to go to doctor's appointments and things like that. I was not going anywhere for fun. I wasn't going and visiting any family. I wasn't doing anything other than very simply getting up in the morning, going through the day pretty much in bed. I would occasionally go out and sit out with my parents and my sister in the living room, but it wasn't that often because simply I didn't feel up to it. I didn't want to walk the extra thing. I was afraid to fall again. So, because it had been proven at that point. I had fallen in my own home, and it had been proven that that place was no longer safe to me. In my brain, I should say. You will always have that feeling after you have something like this. It's almost the same. It's a violation of your trust in yourself, your trust in spaces. You go from being the person who knows, I can get up in the morning, I can go do whatever I want, to being the person who questions every time you get up. Is today going to be the day when I fall again? Is today going to be the day when I get another head injury, a head injury? You really get into a bad cycle when something like this happens. And I was there. I had these doctors telling me, you're brain damaged for life. And I pretty much at that point, I just accepted it. I didn't question it. It was a hard move to accept, but I said, you know what? They've got to be right. They're doctors. They know what they're talking about. I'm always going to have a problem. And it was at that point I started to realize that I wasn't the person that I had been. There had been some things before that, little things that had said it to me, but at that point I hadn't admitted it to myself. That's when I started admitting to myself that I wasn't the same person. Now, I was the bull in our family. When something needed to be moved, I was the one who grabbed it and moved it. It didn't matter how heavy it was. It didn't matter what needed to be done. I grabbed it and I just pulled it along. I pushed it through. I made it fit where it needed to go. I moved it where it needed to be moved. I'm not a small guy. I'm about 5'9". I weigh, depending on, what's going on, I weigh anywhere from 180 to 225. At that point, I think I was creeping up there, getting closer to 235, 245, because I was stagnant. I wasn't doing anything. I was sitting at home. I was eating. That is one good thing. I wasn't starving myself, so I was eating. But I wasn't doing much else. I was eating, I was in bed. I was eating, I was in bed. I was sleeping. There wasn't much to my life, to be honest. So I made the best of what I thought I had. And I started seeing my old life. I started seeing the guy who had gone out, the guy who had went to spend time with friends, the guy who had been married, the guy who actually at that point was still married. I started seeing things and wondering, what was I going to do? How was I going to make my life work? How could I ever be a productive member of society? How could I ever be anything other than that disabled guy? How could I ever be anything other than that brain damaged guy? I was my traumatic brain injury. That's all I was. In my own mind, I made myself into my traumatic brain injury. I didn't have anything else. I didn't define myself by who I was. I didn't define myself by my parents. I didn't define myself by my relationships. I didn't define myself by anything but my traumatic brain injury. Whenever anybody talked to me, that's all I would talk about. I would talk about the person I used to be and how bad it was that I could no longer be that person. I focused on every negative aspect that I could find, and that spiral, that depression spiral that you get in, took hold of me, and I went further and further down that rabbit hole. It was at that point pretty much that I had decided that my marriage was over. So I filed for divorce. I had a mental breakdown. I ended up putting myself into the hospital under suicide watch because I believed that I was nothing. That the only thing about me at that point was my brain injury. And it was a hard thing to accept, but in my mind at that time, that was everything to me. And I will say this, people tried to get me out of that. People tried to make me realize that I was not defined by my head injury. People tried to bring me places. People tried to make the best that they could for me. But I was unwilling. I was so in my own head. I was so down on myself that I could not see past my traumatic brain injury. I could not see past that head injury. I could not see past those words, brain damaged. I could not see past the word disabled. That was who I was. And that lasted for a while. It didn't go away when I was out of respite, which I was a couple days in the hospital under observation before I could get a bed and a respite. They had to find a very specific set of circumstances for me for that respite because of my anxiety attacks, because of my panic attacks, because of my agoraphobia, because of everything else that was piled on top of the depression. They had to find a place where I could go that I would be able to feel somewhat safe, that I wouldn't be set upon by many other people who would be in the same depressive state, because they realized that by putting me into a place like that, by having people who may be manic, who may have other mental issues, it would cause me more detriment than good. This wasn't my parents' decision. This was the decision of the hospital, of the staff, of this is what was best for me. Now, the entire time I was in that hospital, like I said, it was approximately 3 days. My parents were there. Every day my mom drove up. My sister came up with her. My father never left that room. He slept there. He slept in some of the most uncomfortable chairs I've ever seen, and he stayed right by my side. I can't tell you guys how much my family meant to me during these times. If it wasn't for them, I know I would never have made it through. I never would have made it to this point in my life. I never would have gotten out of that downward spiral. So now my dad, he has also had a traumatic brain injury. He had his back in the 80s. I think I mentioned that possibly before. I've actually talked to him. He's going to come up to my house. He's going to shoot a video with me talking about his brain injury, how it affected him, the changes that he noticed. Because I'm going to tell you guys, as you're noticing is a theme with this series, I hope you're noticing by now that we're into video number 4, that the theme is no two are the same. It doesn't matter if you hit the exact same part of your head. It doesn't matter if you get knocked out for the same duration. It doesn't matter if some of the symptoms are the same. No two head injuries are ever the same. And now, when you add in when other people start having them, yeah, some of the symptoms overlap, some of the things overlap, some of the things work. But my head injury is not the same as your head injury. My head injury is not the same as my dad's head injury. And one thing I've noticed after these years of being with a lot of people who have traumatic brain injuries through going to the Carson Center is that we tend, as a community of brain injury survivors, we tend to minimize our own head injuries as we look at others. I have a friend who was in a car accident when he was younger. He was 17 years old. He had a car accident. He's a wonderful man. I aspire to be more like him. Even though he's much younger than me, I aspire to be much more like him because he's taken his head injury and his issues that he's had are way worse than mine. He was in a coma for a very long time. He had to then come out of that coma after having that head injury and relearn so many things because the accident, the brain bleed that he got from the accident caused him to go blind. So now he was at a point where not only did he have a head injury, but he went from a sighted person to a blind person. And he looks at me. He talks to me, and when we were talking about our injuries, and the fact that I have had 7 and he had the 1, he looks at me and he says to me, "I'm so sorry for you. You have it so much worse than I do." And I'll tell you right now, I know I didn't have it worse than he did. I wasn't 17 years old. I wasn't in the middle of high school. I wasn't a sighted person who lost their sight. I didn't become blind. I didn't become much worse than I was, but in my mind I was worse. But when I talked to my friend about our head injuries, I say, "No, yours is much worse." He says, "No, yours is worse." We have other people in our group who say the same thing. As we talk about our own head injuries, we seem to make our head injury smaller. We make our disabilities smaller. We try to empathize with others who have had similar issues. But it seems as a community of head injury survivors, traumatic brain injury survivors, that we tend to poo-poo our own head injuries and try to help others. Whereas I know there's some people out there in the world that, and it's not just injuries, it's not just mental health issues, it's not just health issues, but everything in general. there are people in society who tend to try to say, I'm worse off than you are. And I don't know what it is about those of us that have the head injuries, but we tend to say, no, you're worse than I am. Looks like we're running a little long, guys, so I want to end this one and get on to getting the rest of them done. So, guys, again, this was part 4. We got 5, 6, and 7 still to come. Then we got a special episode that I'm tacking on to this. My dad's going to come up and talk about his head injury. So, again, guys, please take a minute to like the video. Take a minute to subscribe if you're not already. Please leave me a comment. I would love to hear from you guys. I would love to get your opinions on how things are going. I'm trying to make this page into something bigger. So anything you can do to help me grow. If you can share my link on your Facebook page, if you can recommend other people to my Ozpinions channel, that would be great. Alright guys, thanks for listening. Again, the next parts will be up soon. Later.